I am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Gary Thomson. Gary serves as an advisor to CPA firms in critical areas of succession planning, partner compensation, leadership development, and more. After beginning his career with an international firm, Gary started his own practice. Over a 30-plus year period, through organic and M&A, Gary became leadership as the firm scaled from a local to regional to national top 15 firm. Pursuing a passion to impact the future of public accounting, Gary launched Thomson Consulting in 2019. During my interview with Gary, we went over his personal background from growing up in the ministry to leading one of the top CPA firms in the United States. We explore the challenges and benefits of his firm's acquisition and the importance Gary has found in sharing his experiences of vulnerability and openness in his leadership roles. I think you're going to find so many nuggets in here to learn from. I'm so excited for you to listen to this interview with Gary. And for those of you that are on your work-life harmony journey, I am even more excited to be able to provide you a workbook where you can go and do this yourself following the workbook. It's absolutely free. Just go to businessbalancebliss.com/workbook and you can start your journey today. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. I'm very excited to be here with my friend Gary Thomson. Gary, before we get started, do you want to give a little background on yourself and then we'll get right into it?
Sure. Amy, thank you so much for allowing me to be with you. For those who don't know me, I'm a big fan of Amy's, and I've had the privilege just recently of partnering with her in some leadership development, so I couldn't be more excited to be part of this, Amy. Thank you. You know, I'm one of the old gray hair guys, I guess, Amy, in the profession. Started my career almost 40 years ago in Atlanta with a big 8 firm, which dates me a little bit, and then had the privilege of moving to Richmond, Virginia, and starting my own practice in 1989, and just to be able to see that grow and scale, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit today, and then have the privilege of retiring in 2019 to do this, which is to partner with folks like Amy to help be a thought leader in the profession, to use some of the experiences in the past to help guide and advise firms. So very dynamic time in the profession. It was a great time to make the move over. And what an exciting time for our profession in general.
That's awesome. Well, the respect is mutual. It's been awesome getting to know you and all the amazing things that you're able to share and teach. And I've been in the room to watch it. It's very cool. So we're going to start from your beginning. So where'd you grow up? What did your parents do? How many siblings? Give us the background.
Sure. Well, I grew up as a minister's son. So it was a bit of a life of a vagabond. Born in South Carolina, where my dad was in seminary, and then through a series of moves, Tennessee, several places in Virginia, just rotated among various places. So it's interesting, Amy. My life has always been defined by the 3 years I was somewhere, the 3 years I was in the next place. So I can think of life in those buckets, but blessed to be in a family of 4 siblings, 3 sisters, and myself. Unfortunately, 2 of those sisters are deceased now, but 2 of us, the older 2, as a matter of fact, are still around, and blessed to have mom and dad around. Dad just turned 88 last week, and mom's 88.
Wow.
And through a series of events, they ended up back in South Carolina. So none of us are from there. My family's from Maryland, Pennsylvania, DC area, but from seminary to where my dad pastored churches, we moved around the South and Southeast quite a bit. And met my wife when I was 15, which is why we ended up back in Richmond, which is her hometown. So just, great family, in-laws, as well as my immediate family.
Awesome. So All right, so give me a little background on your father. So how did you become a minister,
Well, that's a
and where
great
did that
question.
interest come from?
Yeah, so my grandfather, his dad, was military, Navy, 32 years, a code breaker in World War
Mm,
II, code breaker post World War
cool.
II. And so my dad followed his dad into the family business. My dad was in electronics, radio, actually flew in spy planes right after he went to high school, went right into the Navy. And then while he was in the Navy, through a series of events, his chief petty officer, very religious, faith oriented man, convinced him to spend more time and diligence in studying faith. And my dad, as the language would be in our religion, was converted while he was in the Navy.
Wow.
And that chief petty officer was convinced that my father should dedicate his life to ministry. And almost Amy, sight unseen, he believed him. Got out of the Navy and immediately went to South Carolina and had never visited the college where he ended up going, but it was at by his chief petty officer's recommendation to do it. So just he wasn't like some crazy fool that had made a wreck of his life. He was just someone that was pursuing what he knew, which is what he had learned from his father, and just became convinced that God had other plans for him. So that was
Wow.
that he made in life. Yeah.
What do you think it was that the chief petty officer saw in him to guide him in that? Like, did he ever talk about that? Like, that's quite a recommendation for somebody.
That's a great question. I think my father is an intellectual when it comes to the way that he approaches and studies. I think he, expressed a deep curiosity and expanding his knowledge of his faith. And I think that expression and then that interest probably showed for his officer that he needed to go and get more prescriptive learning, faith-oriented learning, and that faith-oriented learning led him into the ministry. So I don't know that it was like day one, I know I want to be a minister, but it was more of his curiosity to learn drove him to going to a religious affiliated school, which then, led him to believe that God had ministry life for him.
Wow. So had he already met your mom at that point?
He had me and my wife, they were, not childhood, but high school sweethearts in Maryland. And my mother is a nurse and
Mm.
has a twin sister who's a nurse as well. So
Oh, wow.
my dad met the two, identical twin, by the way. My dad met the two of them, and he and my mom started dating by high school, stayed in touch through the Navy time. And literally, he got out of the Navy. Mom and dad got married on August the 13th. And then, as part of their honeymoon, went to South Carolina to visit the college where they would eventually go. So I look back on it because it's a really conservative college, and I think, oh, you went on your honeymoon there? Yes, I had known each other for a while and stayed in touch and dated through his Navy years, and then eventually got married. And so they were married in 1960 and
Wow.
had 4 kids while my dad was in undergraduate school and seminary. So it was about a
Oh my
six,
God.
7 year process, and four of us came along while we were all there.
So did she ever talk about like when your dad said that this was the path he was going? Because that, I mean, is very different than how she knew him.
Yeah.
Was this a background of hers that she was like, yeah, this is the life that I want to have too? Because that, usually when you make a choice like that, it's really a couple's choice of what they're going to have to do for the community, right?
I don't know that I've ever asked the question quite that way. My mom's family, faith oriented, maybe not as deep, but faith oriented people, like you and I both know. Back then, if you will, culturally, it was kind of what he decides ended up being what they decide.
Right.
So I don't know that it was any big lengthy conversation. I do know this, that the change in my dad's life, again, he wasn't some crazy hellion, as we would say. Just the change in my dad's life was something that was impactful to my mom
Yeah.
and to them. And so, probably made it easier to believe this is a journey we need to take together.
So what was her role, I guess, in the church, with her dad, with your dad being the pastor?
That's a great question. I think the pastor's spouse I'm Baptist, in our religion, is one of great support. Obviously, she did a lot of counseling, with in the ministry, My mom still practices as a nurse most of our lives. Sometimes it was internal, like our church had a school. And so she was like the church, I mean, the clinic, the school nurse, I guess is the right word. Other
Yeah.
times she practiced in the general hospital. So it was one of helping take care of four kids, of course, supporting the family, being part of the ministry, particularly in a counseling way. And those were her primary things. I just have such deep admiration for her because I don't know how they did it. Four kids, but mom always played a significant role. As we got older and we were all either in college or heading toward college, she actually spent more time in her career, back in nursing. But for a while, it was less of a priority than what it had been, in prior times.
So what is that like to be a family that's leading a church? Because my outside observation would be that it's very public as a family versus like where if you're in the community, you can be more private as a family, but you're also having to be, even if you're the kids, kind of on, when you're there to be there for people and probably taught how to do that too. So what was that like? Because I'm not familiar with that way of life.
Amy, it's a really insightful place to go because this is the way I think of it. That it impacted me pretty dramatically, and even to today, and I mean that in a positive way because it made me acutely aware of all eyes are on us, and it drove me into leadership type thinking before I would have defined it as leadership thinking. My dad, now I mentioned earlier, three sisters and me. For some reason, there's a little bit more of a worry about how the boy was going to act back then. And my dad would frequently mention that my actions impacted how people viewed his ministry. Obviously, if you have a pastor who can't keep his house in order, if you will, his kids in order, what does that reflect about your leadership? So I did have this pretty strong sense of need for being a leader and being positive and not doing things that would effectively damage, if you will, my dad's ministry. And then as well, Amy, some of as I mentioned, our church had a school. I remember our principal of the school frequently said to me, I'm holding you to a higher standard. One, because I believe you have leadership capacity, but two, because of the reflection it is on what we do. If you're the one, my words, not his, screwing up all the time. But at the same time, Amy, I think that one of the struggles from that I continue to have is being authentic. There was part of my life, a significant part of my life, both in growing up and, as you know, I had a great desire to enjoy public policy and politics, that you can create a persona or an image that you feel that others need to see, but that may not always be you. You need to be on, you need to have this visibility, you need to have this, even though you may want to, be doing something else. So I think that was the counter side to it, is like sometimes you felt like you were living the life that others wanted you to have. And I'm okay with that because leaders have to do that. Leaders have to sacrifice. But I know that most 10 and 12-year-olds think of it that way. I did. That pressure, and it certainly influenced me. I'll tell you,
you were the oldest, right?
What's that?
You were the oldest.
I have an older sister who's 18 months older than me.
Yeah, okay.
She would express, I think, similar things. I think a big pivot point for me, Amy, is that my dad was the lead pastor at churches, and then he became the number 2 pastor at a church, but he led a Bible college. So his primary role was as the leader of a college. His secondary role was the number 2 person at church. And in a way, it gave me a little bit of a break because I was not right. But then when I was 14, soon to be 15, my dad now became a senior pastor at a church. And that was a super impactful moment for me because I had become a little bit lazy, with these things that now all of a sudden we moved to a new market, new area. I was back to being the person. School and stuff like that had taken a backseat to basketball in my life. And all of a sudden I realized, I need to get back on my game. And it came at a really important time, into my freshman year of high school, into my sophomore year, where it kind of made me get back to a little more discernment about a lot of things, from the way I applied myself in school to how I demonstrated leadership. I'm not sure I've ever had this conversation with anyone. So it's like I'm reflecting on this. I don't know whether I'm having PTSD or just sharing authentically. I think I am. But
I
that was
think
a
it's,
really,
but
that
I
was a
think it
pivot
is.
point.
It's such a fascinating thing about you and how that affects the entire family. And like you said, that it developed leadership qualities, but then who are you kind of at the
Yeah,
same time, big
yeah,
separate from the family? And
yeah.
can you stand alone to be that person? When you say leadership qualities, what do you believe were some of the leadership qualities that it taught you?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I guess some of it is just behavioral, right? When you recognize,
Hmm.
in my view of this, is that leaders set a bar, and that generally speaking, followers are never going to go higher than the bar. I mean, you and I
Hmm.
both say that in different ways than lead managing partners of the firms. People are going to follow you and generally are going to be somewhere below where you are. So whether it was, in the way that I approached my schoolwork, whether it was being captain of a basketball program or things of that nature, I just kind of always felt like I owe it to set a bar a little bit higher as a leader. And by the way, people weren't like falling at my feet and worshiping me. They didn't see that
Yeah.
wasn't who it was, but you realize that people were watching you. And if I was a goofball, if I was, not applying myself, if I was, acting, talking, whatever, inappropriately, then basically what they're saying is this guy's the leader and that's the bar. I had that acute awareness of that, Amy, at a young age. I mean,
Hmm.
I had that sense of whatever, and for good or bad, or it
Yeah.
impacted me. And I had a lot of. I grew up most of my formative years in the military area in Norfolk, Virginia. So think
Hmm.
about having a minister's son. Most of my coaches they had a lot of impact on me were all military people, and they also had this high degree of discipline and leadership. So it was just a constant message that was either directly or indirectly there.
Yeah. And the fact that, and I do believe, you have to have the inner, like someone can tell you to be that way, but if you don't buy into it from your inner soul, it's hard to buy into to show those leadership qualities. So how did you end up in accounting with this kind of background?
Purely by accident, Amy. I never knew an accountant. In fact, I laughed because the person who did my mom and dad's tax return was a local pharmacist. And, we would all go to his house. Kids would get sent to the basement. The adults would stay upstairs. The drive home was always a miserable one because my dad, ministers were self-employed. He'd always owe taxes. And now, we shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have done that. So my memories of quote unquote an accountant weren't necessarily all that favorable. But I was strongly inclined toward math. I decided that to enter college as a history, social studies, education major, thinking I would either go to law school or I'd be a college professor, something like that, to teach history and social studies, which was my love. I love geopolitics and stuff like that. So my freshman year of college, I took accounting as an elective because I needed an elective. It was a 3-hour course, and again, I like math. That was the significance of it, and
I
I
took
really
modern
enjoyed.
dance as my elective, just by the way, because you could take it 3 times and be able to get credit for
There
it,
you
not
go.
accounting.
There you
Accounting
go.
was so much harder than modern dance.
Yeah, well, and I had this. My freshman accounting teacher was his first year teaching college. He'd been an old EY partner who had then gone to work as a CFO for a manufacturing company. He was from New Hampshire, and I couldn't understand half of what he said. I just remember him talking about the PA value of bonds. PA. And of course, we didn't have the internet to search what he was saying par, of course, but he was saying PA. And I just, I liked him. He came to me after a first semester and said, I really think you ought to switch your major to accounting. Even if you want to go to law school, the degree is much more substantive than a history degree or something of that nature. So I flipped over and basically did accounting and history in both because I did want to continue my enjoyment of history and learning. And then he asked me to be his teacher's aide after my first year, start
Oh,
teaching students. And I found a great deal of meaning in that. Plus, it was economically rewarding to get paid to do that. And so, Amy, even going into my senior year, I didn't anticipate a career in public accounting. It wasn't something that I had anticipated. I had been asked about doing an internship my junior summer, and I wasn't interested in that. I actually went back to where I now live, stayed and worked for my now father-in-law so I could be with my now wife. We got engaged that summer. And so I turned down the typical, let's do an internship and, at a big eight firm to do it. And then my senior year just started reflecting on what was next and just decided that maybe an opportunity to go into public accounting and then have a few years of experience might lead to a better opportunity to get into a law school that I wanted to go to. And boom, I did it and enjoyed it and didn't look back. So it was not purely happenstance, but an elective led to a professor telling me I ought to reconsider, and me just saying okay, and here it is.
Well, you kind of fell in your father's footsteps of someone noticing in you where you should go.
Absolutely, a good mentor, who made sense, right? It wasn't like I was blindly accepting it, but it sure made sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. It's so nice when you can look back and see how someone kind of put their print on you and they don't even realize it, like in your lifetime. I mean, you might have known them at the time, but they have like no idea the impact, like these people along the way on.
You're right. And my father-in-law, who's entrepreneurial, had a good mid-level career at Pepsi-Cola, just came home and said, I can't do this. I can't work for someone. I need to start my own business. Four daughters at the time, probably all under the age of maybe 8 or 9.
Wow.
And left his job there and started a construction fencing related business. And so, his impact on me and thinking about business and kind of entrepreneurialism combined with Mr. Monday's, conversation around, I think this is what you ought to do. You kind of the two of those added up. And yeah, I know that you feel the same way. The ability now to be on the other side, the mentoring side of it, because I do realize that it wasn't some deep reflection that caused me to do that. It was the experiences I had from my father-in-law and seeing the way he approached business to someone like Mr. Monday, who had this successful career and candidly gave it up to come be a teacher.
Yeah.
At a college, I'm like, why shouldn't I listen to these people, right, or follow their example?
Yeah. So you never had an interest in going to ministry?
Not really. I strongly believe that it's a call. I never felt that call. I never felt that interest. I will say that people laugh at this when they hear me, although it probably explains a lot. Like I used to compete in preaching contests. I had these contests where you would, be asked to prepare a sermon as young people. I used to win these competitions, so I liked the ability to articulate, particularly my faith, and put thoughts into logic and connect the dots on what otherwise may seem as an incongruent passage of the Bible, much like you and I like to do now, and taking what seem to be incongruent topics in the profession and connecting them. So I enjoyed learning. Memorizing, the Bible as an example, particularly the New Testament in my life, and spent a lot of time doing that. Deep faith is a deep part of my core beliefs, but now I never felt it. A lot of people assumed it because again, I enjoyed the outward expression and things of that nature, but you never had that belief. I practice it. I teach. I've taught, I've preached in our church. I've taught in Sunday school for young adults classes to young couples and stuff like that, but never felt as a profession, if you will, or a vocation that I was called to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's important too, because that's your work-life balance, kind of, where like sometimes when you take something that you enjoy and make it a job, you don't enjoy it anymore. So when you can do it more as a give back, where you're still seeing value, but like it's not your job, you can get more reward out of it, possibly.
Yeah. And it influences a lot of how I coach and talk to people today, not in an overtly religious way, because we all know we have to be careful. I don't diminish what I believe, but at the same time, be careful. But it does influence things. Like an example of on Sunday, if I'm standing in front of a young adults class teaching about money and being wise with money and applying principles, I can actually use those same principles when I meet a new partner who all of a sudden starting to make money. And I see so many of them just go spend it and over leverage themselves and over commit themselves. And then there's a point in their career where they see an opportunity to pivot and take a chance and do something else, but they're afraid to do it because now they're deeply committed from a
Yes.
financial side. I feel the same way on the faith side. I see a lot of young people who are called to maybe do something else, but they've overcommitted their life financially. And so there's a lot of applicability to it, but it's just done in a different way. And again, one I can do in a turn to a particular passage of scripture, and the other I do more from the standpoint of just common sense experiential principles.
Yeah, I love it. So, okay, so you went into your accounting career. Where did you go from there?
I went to Arthur Anderson. You and I have had this conversation. I went to
Yeah.
Arthur Anderson, Atlanta, Georgia, 133 Peachtree Street. Still remember it. And just, Amy, when I look back on that experience, again, 40 years ago at this June that I walked in the door, I'll think about it and say, you know, they taught me a lot in a short period of time. The focus on business development, being a well-rounded professional, not just a good technical person. They definitely thought differently. They allowed a lot of entrepreneurialism. Technology was just starting to hit, what we were doing, from the use of PCs to automated trial balances to things like Lotus and WordPerfect back in the day. And Anderson was at the top of their game as it relates to culture and thinking about it. Work hard, play hard was a balance. So I couldn't have been more fortunate to have begun my career there and laying the groundwork for a lot of things that I would experience. But I was primarily an SEC high-tech audit person, very niche, very focused, few clients, but clients that had pretty big demands on our schedules.
So what led you to leave there?
If I were being diplomatic, I would say strong entrepreneurial spirit. If I were being direct, a father-in-law who really wanted us to get to Richmond, Virginia, and offer me an opportunity to not only partner in his business, but also to be able to start my own practice. So we were in Atlanta. We knew we would eventually make our way back to Richmond. My wife's family is very close. They're a big part of my life as well. And so, the desire to get back to Richmond drove the conversation. Arthur Anderson had a Richmond presence, but it was a satellite office of the DC practice. Pretty heavy travel requirements, and at that point in life, I traveled a lot already. Now it was just time to do something different. So that was the main part, was family, just be back with the family and start a next career.
So what was it like to start your own practice versus what you thought it was going to be like?
Yeah, it was more difficult. I mean, to think, I mentioned earlier, SEC high-tech people, not many sole proprietors get an opportunity to do SEC work, much less technology work. And so the big change for me, Amy, was the level of work. I didn't know about 941s. Maybe we did a payroll reconciliation, but we were dealing with large publicly traded companies, and that wasn't the level of work that we did. We just didn't have that next level down of business. And so I was so privileged to now begin working with, entrepreneurs, particularly in the construction business. It was a lot of my focus because my father-in-law was so helpful in introducing me to his friends and colleagues and things of that nature, that they were just dealing with real life stuff, how to get financing, how to make payroll, how to save taxes. And so I think for me, I just had not really had much exposure to the technical aspects of it. But I think what I had, and I think that enabled me through the rest of my career, is the ability to take complex matters and try to synthesize them into something to help business leaders. So while I would never be described as the super technical person, I was just a business person. I had a curiosity about business issues. I had a curiosity about how political and world issues affected my clients, and making the connection. I just became their business partner, but the transition was they still wanted you to do their technical work.
Yeah.
And, that was a big challenge. And the second challenge was just, the pure economics of starting a practice. Mm-hmm. And the third one, Amy, which helps me reflect a lot as I work with individuals that are thinking about growth. I'm not a growth consultant, so I'm not suggesting that I am, but it was hard for me because I recognized that I could play a significant role with companies. I got to know them. I was doing a lot of business networking, but they didn't necessarily just come my way overnight. Mm-hmm. Changing CPAs is a significant event. There almost has to be a reason why, some kind of pain, some type of issue, some type of, whatever. And I'm like, why aren't these people who I know trust me, who are giving me opportunities to serve on their boards and stuff, why aren't they coming? And I began to realize how long the sales cycle could be in that. So those are
Yeah.
pretty impactful parts of my early career.
Yeah. What about once you started getting clients and hiring people, when you go from being the person doing everything to having to manage employees, how was that transition?
It was different. I believe that most of the people who had worked with me actually say that I'm likely the opposite of the typical CPA who has trouble leveraging. I'm the other way around. I probably leverage without giving expectations, leverage with an understanding that people are going to be making mistakes, and I'm okay with it. And so it was fun in a way to be able to just begin leveraging. I think some of the people who work for me would say, could you help give me a little more instruction rather than just saying, here it is. So I found it really super helpful to have people at it, and felt just really comfortable leveraging work and giving people work to do. And even, as you know, recently, I was so blessed to have my daughter join the business. And the one thing I said to her when we were talking about her joining my practice, and what I do now is, Dad's not the best at staying in touch. Dad's really good at trusting you to do the work, and Dad's really good at allowing you to take risks. But if you need me, you're going to have to come grab me. And
Yeah.
I don't say that at all in a bragging way, but I say that be responsive to your question. I always found it really easy to leverage work. I didn't find it always as easy to stay on top of the help that they needed. So no doubt people may have floundered a little bit,
Yeah.
working for me, because I'm like, trust them. They're smart.
Yeah.
They'll figure it out.
Did that get you in trouble ever?
Yes, of course, yeah, it did. We've had political leaders in our country who believe strongly in just hiring good people, letting them run, and you've seen some, pretty big examples of that. I think back to, I'm the Reagan era and the Iran-Contra, right? That happened because the president leveraged and didn't necessarily, oversee it as well. And so, yes, while I've never had an Iran-Contra affair, I'm not suggesting that, of course, but there were times where we made some mistakes that clearly, if I had been a little more engaged, would have helped. I believe strongly in business development, being in the community. And so my appetite was for that, and sometimes putting it a little bit at risk on the technical side.
Yeah. So as your firm grew, it eventually got acquired, correct?
Yes.
So how did that happen? Was that something you were looking for?
No, it wasn't. In fact, Amy, I think the dynamics of where we are as a profession now with private equity and things of that nature, I correlate that discussion to what you just asked me. So our firm was strongly independent. We saw a future for ourselves, but we had also gone through a process of thinking about the future and thinking about priorities that supported that vision for the future. And we also had this understanding of what we thought some of those priorities were going to cost us, really professionalizing our C-suite, to investing in some technology and things that were going to help us. And we went from a strong position of autonomy and independence to, in less than a year period of time, have the unanimous vote to merge up. Now, the firm was probably 60% of our 40%. So it was a merge up. We were giving up independence, but it wasn't like we were, going from a $20 million firm to a $1 billion firm. But the point was the effort we had gone through strategically to identify our strengths and weaknesses and what we need made us aware that when this opportunity came to join, the firm was Dixon Hughes, we were Goodman, we could see in them a lot of the investments that we need to make. They were already there. They already had done. They could see in us some markets and some opportunities and new services that matched. So it was the same thing that kept us independent for a long, long, long time, allowed us this introspection into what it might look like to be together. But nonetheless, a difficult decision to give it up.
Yeah. So what do you think you lost in that decision, or maybe what other people felt that they lost?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, Amy, you and I strongly value culture. We evaluated values and in looking at what we were both about, but we didn't necessarily strongly evaluate culture as much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the integration over the first 6 months to a year and a half was impacted by our failure to truly understand the cultural differences. One small example we used to use all the time, we were a moderate growth, cost-oriented firm. So we grew, but we weren't out there growing at tremendous clips. We also minded our nickels and pennies. The firm we merged with had a tremendous reputation for growth. And the exchange for growth and fast growth was they allowed more flexibility in spending. And so we would, as an example, if we sent people to outside CPE, they may stay at the Holiday Inn Express, and eat at Chili's. They would stay at the Marriott Marquis and eat at Ruth's Chris or something like that.
Right.
And those are just cultural differences. We had some similarities in bottom line. We weren't that far off in, profitability, but our thinking on how to get there was so different that was an example of a cultural way that we lived it out. And so that became a struggle. We gave up, some of that, where we knew who we were, what we were about, and we now became a little more focused on KPIs and performance. And we certainly changed the way we thought about some things in exchange for where we had been.
Yeah. So, is there anything you regret about doing it?
No, I believe when I look back on it that our people benefited greatly from it and our clients benefited greatly from it. So regret may be a stronger word than I would use, but there's some things about some of our partners who felt like maybe they got left behind that I would like to have a redo. It's easier, if that's the right term, sometimes just to say, you're not cutting it, see you later, than it is to put someone on your back and say, how can I help you?
Right.
And I think now in this second career, one of the things that's impacted me is I look back at a lot of our really good partners who just didn't survive the merger very well. They ended up as sole proprietors, they ended up at other firms. And I look back on that and say, what might I have done differently to help them? Good people, lived out our values of the firm, but we're just really having a hard time getting to the new level of performance standards. Sometimes that was on them. And at some point, you have to call the question, no doubt about it. But there are a few times that maybe I could have been a little more patient and helpful to get them there. So I think it's not a regret, it's a reflection.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And I think this comes up a lot in the discussion now with PE and acquisitions of people that don't benefit from the merger as much as the partners that are more have been there longer and so forth. So, what would your advice be as far as firms looking at this, making sure that the people that have given their careers, but they're not yet at that level, still benefit from this if that's the path that they go?
Yeah, I think of that in a bifurcated way, Amy. First, I think of about partners. We spend a lot of time in the profession talking about people, and sometimes I think we forget that partners are people too.
Yes.
We're so worried about our young staff, and we're going to talk about those in a second. We should be, but really thinking about partners who have dedicated their lives to help grow our firms, et cetera. I think the reflection on that is we as a profession for about 15 or 20 years at least had market partners and we had doer partners. And then all of a sudden, as some of the market partners, founder partners retired, we expected doers to be something we never asked them to be. And then we did a merger and they no longer had a place. We weren't fair in that. And so it challenges our thinking around making sure that we have people doing the highest and best use. And then when we transition, if we transition into merger, PE, ESOP, whatever it is, that we have our partners all synchronized on highest and best use. Point number two is directly to the people itself. The future of our profession are the people you and I enjoy talking to. And how can we make sure that we have a balanced view that this isn't all about monetization of my retirement? I can't ignore that. We're a business and there's business imperatives to that. But making sure that some really good people who've been a big part of our career are taken care of, are looked after in distinctive ways, ought to be a major part of our fiduciary responsibility.
So I want to get to the fact that you gave kind of the law side behind in this path that you went on. So were there ways that you were able to incorporate that love that you had for history and social studies and public service, all of those things. How were you able to still incorporate that, or are you finding that you're doing it now?
I believe that we all need to round ourselves out. If we don't do things that we enjoy, we're likely not going to be good professionals, right? There's the time that we spend on getting better as a professional. There's time we spend personally, and then there's time that we spend just, expanding our horizons. And so I've done for a long time, been involved in public service, public policy. And so those outlets have always been there. What I felt though, Amy, is that I need to be able to demonstrate to my partners and to others in the firm that those were bringing value, not only because Gary enjoyed them, but to the firm. And so, whether I was enjoying politics, serving on boards, serving in the community, I wanted to find a way that there was an attribution back to the success of the firm. So that's been my focus. Is I want to do that. I want to do it in a big way, and I've enjoyed doing that, giving and being part of those things. But I also wanted to be able to demonstrate it meant something to the firm for me giving up the time to be able to do it. So I've
Yeah.
served on college boards, chairman of the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, served the State Society as chairman, been involved heavily in public policy and politics, things from the American Heart Association, you name it. I mean, all those things make me who I want to be and how I did want to, choose to live life out.
Yeah. So your life has been one of public service, even from the time that you were younger, and really being there for your community or your firm or, the people at your church. So when you said earlier, sometimes I had to ignore like maybe who I was authentically. Now that you're retired,
Right.
what does that look like for you? What would be different for you to be Gary?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I made this pivot into the consulting world, it's like, okay, what do I free up? What do I give? I still say that I have instincts toward carefully picking and choosing how I articulate my thoughts on things. I mean, candidly, I could look at Twitter or X for 5 minutes and I want to weigh in on almost everything that I see. Like I want to offer my opinion. Then I go, okay, first of all, does anyone really care? And secondly, does it benefit other things I'm trying to do by weighing in? So I still say I exercise a due amount of care on those things, but I probably now on the more, if you will, authentic side, have more candid conversations with people, kind of share what's on my mind. A little bit of our conversation today. I mean, I've mentioned earlier, I don't think I've ever been asked a question and sharing kind of why. But when I deal with managing partners and leaders of firms now in this role, I mean, I can really back up and say, let me tell you about some of the mistakes that I made. And candidly, I didn't grow up in an era where you talked about your mistakes.
Right.
You wanted to be seen as he's got it all together. And now I can say to firms, I think you're going to benefit from my mistakes more than you will my successes because you won't have to repeat them. So that's a way where I'm not sure I would have been able to do that 15 years ago, 20 years ago, because I wanted to build this image, this persona of the leader, right? Who's got it all figured out. And now you go, I didn't have it all figured out, and I can reflect on that and be okay with it.
So can you remember your first experience doing that? Because I know for me, like it was a journey. The first time I was on stage to like tell a story I've never told before, and I could feel like the whole feeling inside of me of like I can't believe I'm doing this right now, and then still show I'm fine on stage.
Yeah.
So do you remember that point where it was a breakthrough for you to be able to do that?
Yes, I actually do. We had started a leadership program in our firm geared to clarifying the pathway to partners. It's often called in the profession, and we call it the Partner Development Committee. Amy and I just had a privilege of partnering on something similar for an alliance. And so, Amy, I remember it was by pure happenstance that our keynote speaker for an evening event, dinner event, had weather delay and couldn't get to us. You and I know all about that. And so I remember that we had a partner who was kind of facilitating that, came to me and said, I think you ought to be the keynote speaker. And part of the that weekend, 2-day event, I don't know if it's a weekend or weekday, but part of that event was on leadership and authenticity and, what it's like. And I just remember standing in front of the group. It was not completely unscripted because I probably had 6 hours of time, but my bullet points were around expressing some significant mistakes that I had made from a leadership standpoint, where back to my earlier conversation where my predisposition to allowing people to run had cost me and what it looked like and visually how that felt to me, practically how it impacted it and how I overcame it. And I remember it was like, I'm not sure I would have done it if I'd had 2 days to prepare.
Think about it. Yeah.
But it was like, and it was amazing how much afterwards people came up. These are people that knew me in the firm. These are 20 of our high performers, and like, wow, we just thought you were the guy whose hair's always in place, always wearing the starched shirt, always prepared, always prepared. And the second time, Amy, that I remember it is I was also always really prepared for any type of communication to our people. Just I'm not a script person, but notes and rehearsing, thinking it out. And our communication person said, Gary, I think that you're almost too prepared. You need to be a little more whatever. And so one day, without any warning, she walked in my office with her phone and said, I want you to give me 90 seconds on this topic. And it was a topic that we were rolling out. I don't want you to put your sport coat on. I don't want you to worry about your bullet points. Just talk. And I did. And she sent that message out, and it was some of the best feedback that I ever gotten. And the one thing that kept coming through is it felt more authentic or genuine. It was the same words I would have used, but it just came across. And so those two episodes, one with the leadership group where I just kind of laid bare, closed the door, and talk about what I consider to be some failures in my leadership. First time I'd ever been that, if you want to use the word vulnerable. And then the second was a stupid video, unprepared, no sport coat. I don't even remember what my hair looked like back then. And, just had the
I'm sure it wasn't that out of place.
Probably not, but it felt uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, and those are like the reps sometimes you need. And then when you see the response that people actually feel closer to you because of it, not looking down on you and to break some of those beliefs of the past, like from growing up where you always had to be on stage and perfect, to show that example that sometimes the bar is, I am here, but I am human. And that's what you showed, so.
Okay, you and I both know that leaders' words, even inadvertent, take on tremendous meaning sometimes. So I think that always just impressed upon me this care, every word carefully, whatever. And then what you realize is that the downside of that can be this reflection on authenticity. And so a big lesson.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so many good things. I like to end it with some rapid fire questions. So you get to pick a category. Family and friends, money, spiritual, or health?
We'll go with family and friends. We'll go with topic number one.
Okay. I'm surprised you didn't say spiritual.
I figured we talked about that a lot already. So
yeah, okay. Things or actions I don't have that I want to have with my family and friends.
That I don't have that I want to have.
Yes.
Probably a little more flexibility. I feel like I'm a very forward-looking, agile person, but at the same time, I tend to want things. I'm still a CPA, right? I want things to be, in a lane sometime, and I enjoy being pushed, but sometimes I'm not ready to be pushed. So a little more agility, flexibility.
Things or actions I do have that I want to keep with my family and friends.
I think just candor. I think I have the ability to be candid and, express myself well among friends and family. I got a challenge with that external to that group. But I feel like I can be different in the room with the close-knit groups of friends. I like to have fun. I'm a jokester. So, those type things.
That's awesome. Things or actions I don't have that I don't want to have.
That I don't have and that I
don't want to have with your family.
I don't want to be closed-minded.
Yeah.
I look back to my comments earlier. I grew up in a religious environment that was very closed-minded, and it limited at times our ability to think for ourselves. And I've always wanted to resist that. And so I don't have that, and I don't want to ever get that, whether it's politics, whether it's with friends, whether it's in religion, whether it's in business. I might not agree with you, but I don't want to be closed-minded.
Right. Okay, last one. Things or actions that I do have that I don't want. So I want to release it with my family and friends.
I'm too busy, and I don't take the time for the things that are important. A couple of years ago, I had a little bit of a minor episode, potential health thing that seemed pretty dramatic at the time. Fortunately, ended up not being, and it gave me this awareness of the quality of time. unfortunately, and I know that you know this, but you're more disciplined in this area. The hamster wheel is real. And I
Mm-hmm.
pretty quickly find myself getting back on the hamster wheel. And then I go, daggone, I should have gone ahead and played golf with my buddies on Saturday. What's 4 hours going to hurt me as opposed to feeling like I need to do that? Or, whatever it may be with family. So I don't always take the time to not be busy.
Yeah. So many great things in your story, and thank you for being so authentic and open during this conversation. But is there anything that we didn't talk about, or anything you want to make sure people take away from this conversation, just in closing?
Well, Amy, I'm so fortunate to be around you. You know that one of my bully pulpits is that I feel that leaders need to be optimistic. And like there's a lot of heaviness
Mm-hmm.
in the world, and that heaviness has been around for a while. It seems distinctly more than it has been in the past. And so they look for the Amy's and the Garys in the world and other leaders of the world to be optimistic, excited about the future. And I would just encourage people, even when things are heavy and even when you may not necessarily have complete clarity on the future, to know that we can get it done, and people are looking to us for that. Inspiration is something that we need to provide, and so I think it's really important for us to have that mindset.
I think you're an inspiration, and I think you're also an example that there's so many, people we encounter that think it's too late to make a change or too late to be open with yourself of what else you could expand on, and you show that every day. So thank you so much for being on and sharing your story.
Thank you, and thank you for pushing me a little bit today. That's been enjoyable.
And now for my mindful moments with this interview with Gary. So many nuggets here that I want to cover. And just for us to kind of step back and think about how our life experiences have shaped us in the past. And there were two big things that Gary talked about from his past. One, of coming from a family with a military background and how that affected Gary, as well as the coaches he had and so forth, all having that same background and giving him that discipline in his life. And the second being his father being a part of the ministry. And we talked a lot about how that affected him personally, how that affected his family, because what happens is that the whole family actually was in support of his father in order for his father to be successful as a minister. And one of the skills that Gary learned very early on was that people were watching and showing up in the best way possible so that his father was reflected on well, his family was reflected on well. And he calls that really his leadership traits really coming out very early, that he really had it from the inside out, that this was important to him to be able to have the right actions to support his father and not doing things that may embarrass his father as he's growing up. And he had the extra pressure of even the principal at his school telling him he needed to be an example, which was something that we talked about maybe later on as a leader. But I think it's a big thing here is setting that bar high if you are a leader, that the people underneath you are not going to exceed the bar that you set. And so when you're thinking about the example that you want to create and you're trying to push initiatives into your organization, if you are not the example of that, if you are not living that, it's very hard for people to follow because they don't feel it's authentic. And so because of that, it creates a pressure on any leader that is in front of people to really show up in the way that they want people to interact, the values that they want people to demonstrate, so that it is congruent with who they are and who the organization is, or whatever you are representing, whether it's a family, a community, a school, and so forth. So it was interesting his path, that he had no accountant in his background, but he did have a couple of people that he looked up to. One being a professor that he took accounting from, and he took it as an elective, which I still pointed out was an amazing elective to take because I think that's a very hard elective. But for him, he had an interest in it. And like he talked about with his father, I think he shares that curiosity and being a learner. And because math came naturally to him, he went into it. And that professor took interest in him, put the nugget in his head that maybe you should become an accountant. And I think that's important that we think about that, because where are we planting seeds with others that are younger to let them know where their gift is starting to shine? That sometimes we can't even recognize it within ourselves. We can just say, oh, this comes easy to us, or we like it, but not necessarily notice that this could be a career, this could be a future for us. This professor also asked him to be a teaching assistant. And so it really brought him closer into his craft and skill, and eventually decided to go into public accounting. He also has said that his father-in-law, being an entrepreneur, was really a great mentor to him as well. And it impacted him watching him be in business and understanding how business worked and what were the struggles and the risks that you take. Because as a business owner, the risks are much different than somebody that is getting promoted through the years. And some risks go well, most don't. And not everybody knows all the risks that don't go well, but this is really important. It was one of those things that he had someone to look to be able to draw upon that when he was in the position of leadership as well. And I think it's really important for us to identify those people that have made an impact for us in our lives and given us a view of another path. And it may not be the total path you went on for your career, but did it affect your life? Did it affect something outside of your life as well? And so we talked about his transition from going from a big national accounting firm to starting his own practice. And I remember having the same feeling when I started my own business, that I would audit bank recs, but I never actually done a bank rec. And when I opened my practice, that was an advisory services practice, I took on the first couple clients myself so I could see what the work is, and realized how hard a reconciliation can be for a business, and where you had to find the ins and outs in order to later better consult. And that was the same thing that he identified. And I really believe as a leader, we have to roll up our sleeves sometimes and learn things that we don't anticipate we have to learn as a leader in order to lead it with other people and be able to explain it and understand what it's like to be in their shoes. The other thing was just the challenge of economics, that everything is coming out of your pocket. You can't control what you can't control. So the economy goes down, there's a political change, whatever there is, you can only business plan as good as you can plan based on the things that you know. And so that challenge of where the money's going to come from or where retirement's going to come from are a lot of the struggles that business owners encounter. And that he expected when he put a shingle out that business would just come. And I think a lot of people feel that way without really understanding what is their purpose, what are the types of clients that they want, and have a really targeted marketing strategy. I often do not see a targeted marketing strategy. It's kind of like, throw this out, this is what I do, see what sticks and who comes, versus really identifying who you want to come your way and really being targeted with your marketing and networking activities to do it. One of the things, because of his background, that he was so good at was really that communication, being in a community, being involved in the community. And because of that, his business development side of his leadership was strong. And it grew very fast under his leadership. And like he talked about, eventually moved into larger and larger firms till they became Dixon Hughes Goodman. And we talked about the struggles of when businesses merge together and the good, the bad, the ugly, and who might get left behind in the process. And some of his reflections of what things maybe they should have been asking that they didn't know, or time they should have taken with partners that really provided a lot of contribution when they were separate firms, but when they came together, their contribution was missed, and how you could have helped them to level up to maybe be able to make it in that environment, but then also understand that many people don't make it in larger environments, that they purposely go to smaller places to work. So it is important to understand that. I loved his moment of talking about that partners are people too. I think a lot of times when we look at leaders, we look at them and think they have it all and aren't really thinking about the human side, the struggles that they go through, and making sure that they are being helped, they are still being coached. I think we think that they need to have all the answers, but we also have to have coaching for our leaders, a sounding board, and so forth. So this really led to Gary being able to create what he's created today, and look at some of the things that he did in the past that will now help organizations today and into the future be able to understand those things before they went into it. And one of the things that Gary talked about that became so important and has been an evolution for him is really understanding that he could show up authentically, that he didn't always have to be on and perfect in order to represent and be a leader, that people bonded with him when he was more authentic, when he was talking about the mistakes of the past, or when he wasn't completely rehearsed or scripted. And those are really important things for all of us to think about, that we want to know the human side of people, that we don't have to be perfect, and that when we lead, our energy matters, and our energy is everything. So we can say the words, but if we aren't showing we're optimistic, or if we aren't inspiring the people around us, it's very hard for people to believe in the values that we're creating, or the culture we're creating, or the goals that we have if we don't look like we believe. And so it's important as a leader to show up in the way that you want others to show up, and to demonstrate the values that you have as well. So I was so inspired. I'm always inspired by Gary. I really enjoy working with him. I think he's so genuine, and it's been, just awesome to see the contribution that he makes in the accounting profession. And these are the things that can help you on your journey when you're really looking to find that authenticity, that vulnerability in yourself. That's why we have the free materials that we talked about, where you can go on our site, businessbalancebliss.com/workbook, and get a free download of the workbook and walk through it yourself. Or we have coaching programs on that site that are available to sign up for, where we can help you through that journey of really identifying who you are, what your unique gifts are, what your purpose is, and being able to better relate your brand to the organization around you, or even to the people around you, so that you show up the same way no matter where you are. And that energy is so important. And so when we're intentional with that energy, not only do we create a better life for ourselves, but we create a better life for the people around us. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing and subscribing to this podcast. I hope that you share it with other people that you think it could be helpful for, and make sure to join us for our next interview to learn your next lessons. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.